How did a trading company become powerful enough to control most of the Indian subcontinent? Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unravel the epic, true history of how the British East India Company pulled off, literally, one of the most astonishing and ruthless corporate takeovers in human history.
Let's dive right into this massive historical paradox. It is almost unbelievable when you really think about it. To grasp how this all happened, we have to rewind the clock to a time when the British were nothing more than humble merchants, incredibly far from the absolute rulers that eventually become.
Picture the year 1600. Queen Elizabeth I grants a royal charter to the East India Company. Their only goal? Establish tiny, fortified factories like the famous one in Surat, strictly for trade. Look, at this time, the Mughal Empire was an absolute titan. The British couldn't even dream of challenging the emperor militarily. They had to play nice and basically wait in the wings. But, the lure of the East was completely intoxicating. The immense wealth promised by goods like cotton, silk, and exotic spices was so strong that it sparked fierce, violent competition. And the British weren't alone in this. They were constantly fending off French and Dutch rivals who were desperately trying to carve out their own highly lucrative spheres of influence.
But as we know, empires, no matter how massive, just don't last forever. Fast forward to the death of Emperor Aurangzeb in 1707. This was the massive turning point. That mighty Mughal shield that had easily kept ambitious European traders in check for decades suddenly began to crack.
The empire was essentially tearing itself apart from the inside. We're talking internal chaos, a string of weak successors, massive royal bankruptcies, and brutal foreign invasions by rulers like Nadir Shah. All of this absolutely drained the central authority. It created this sprawling power vacuum, and the East India Company, quietly sitting in their coastal forts watching the chaos unfold, was more than eager to jump in. Now, the narrative dramatically shifts about 50 years later in Bengal. The Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Daulah, clashed with the company. Why? Because they were illegally increasing their military strength, misusing trading privileges, and aggressively fortifying Calcutta right behind his back. It was a showdown just waiting to happen, a massive foreign corporation acting like a sovereign nation on his soil.
But here's the absolutely crucial point. The British didn't win the legendary Battle of Plassey through sheer military might. No, they won it with a bribe. They orchestrated a massive secret betrayal with the Nawab's own top military commander, Mir Jafar. When the battle actually started, Mir Jafar simply held his troops back. The British scored a shockingly easy victory, installed their conspirator as a puppet ruler, and secured unprecedented wealth to fund their growing war machine.
7 years later, though, at the Battle of Buxar, the company faced its ultimate test for dominance. This wasn't just a minor skirmish over a single province. This was a massive war for the entire future of Eastern India, and the stakes had literally never been higher.
The British found themselves staring down a staggering combined force. They weren't just fighting one army. They faced the Nawab of Bengal, the Nawab of Awadh, and the Mughal Emperor himself, Shah Alam II. Defeating those three prominent Indian rulers all at the same time was an astonishing military triumph. It firmly cemented the British as an unstoppable force in the subcontinent. Following that decisive victory, let's jump right to 1765 and the post-war Treaty of Allahabad. With just the stroke of a quill, a single legal document fundamentally transformed the East India Company forever.
Through this treaty, they secured Diwani rights. Now, what does that actually mean in plain English? It means they legally became the official tax collectors for the subcontinent's wealthiest provinces. They were no longer just trading goods for profit. They were legally extracting massive land revenue, literally using Indian money to fund their own administration and pay for their future wars of conquest.
It is just staggering to realize how rapidly this company evolved. In under a single decade, from 1757 to 1765, they transformed from being mere traders desperately trying to protect their coastal warehouses into wealthy, sovereign rulers holding the literal purse strings of an empire.
So that brings up a pretty fascinating question. How did they swallow the rest of this vast, diverse subcontinent? Wars are incredibly expensive, right? And while they certainly fought formidable foes like Tipu Sultan of Mysore, the British increasingly started relying on strategic, highly calculated ink and paper conquests. Which brings us to the Subsidiary Alliance, an incredibly insidious policy introduced by Lord Wellesley. Honestly, it was essentially a state-sponsored protection racket. It required Indian rulers to pay for British troops stationed in their own lands and completely surrender control of their foreign policy.
It allowed the British to swallow independent states from the inside out without firing a single shot, turning once proud rulers into terrified, dependent puppets.
Then came the doctrine of lapse under Lord Dalhousie. The rule was simple, but devastating. If an Indian ruler died without a natural male heir, the British just refused to recognize an adopted one, and they annexed the state directly into British territory. Systematically wiping out ancient royal lineages with the stroke of a pen like this generated an immense, explosive amount of anger across every corner of the subcontinent.
Meanwhile, everyday people were suffering unimaginably. The economy was being actively, deliberately drained. Traditional Indian artisans and highly skilled weavers were absolutely crushed because the market was suddenly flooded with cheap, mass-produced, British-manufactured goods. At the very same time, raw materials were being forcefully exported out to Britain, and local farmers were starving under punishing new land taxes.
By the mid-19th century, the pressure was completely unbearable. Decades of political humiliation from stolen kingdoms, widespread economic ruin, and deep-seated religious anxieties finally collided. The year 1857 became the ultimate boiling point.
The pressure was coming from literally all sides. Angry, displaced rulers, starving farmers, and mistreated Indian soldiers known as sepoys. But the immediate trigger, that was the introduction of new rifle cartridges, rumored to be greased with cow and pig fat, which was deeply offensive to both Hindu and Muslim sepoys. This controversy was the match that set the whole powder keg ablaze, kicking off a massive, bloody war of independence in Meerut.
The uprising was brutal, and it was widespread. Although the British military eventually crushed the rebellion after months of fierce fighting, the sheer scale of the mutiny completely shocked London. It forced the British government to step in and entirely strip the East India Company of its power. Just like that, the era of the corporate empire was over.
And so, in 1858, the British Raj was officially born under direct crown rule, with Queen Victoria as sovereign. The British rapidly began building modern infrastructure like railways and telegraphs. But make no mistake here, these weren't just benevolent gifts of modernization. They were primarily designed to move British troops swiftly to crush any future rebellions and to extract India's immense wealth even faster to the ports.
To truly grasp this almost unbelievable story, just look at the trajectory. It starts with humble traders arriving at the coast, taking massive advantage of a sudden power vacuum, winning decisive battles through boardroom-style betrayal, ruthlessly expanding through ink and paper extortion, pushing a desperate people to rebel, and finally culminating in the formal birth of a global, government-run empire. Which leaves us with a fascinating, provocative question to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. A single corporate monopoly, driven entirely by profit and shareholder returns, managed to conquer one of the richest subcontinents on Earth. How much of our modern global economy, our international borders, and our world today was shaped by the ruthless ambition of this one trading company? Think about that the next time you hear a debate about corporate power. Thanks for joining me on this incredible journey, and keep questioning history.